Good morning, Year 9. Hope you're well and looking forward to continuing our online reading session this morning. We're going to continue with The Secret Life of Bees, and we're going to be going from page 16 where we left off yesterday. Please follow along with my online ruler so you can keep up with the story as I read. I huddled on the floor beside the door and watched through air that seemed all scratched up. I saw her take her by the shoulders and shake her head bouncing back and forth. I saw the whiteness of his lip. And then, though everything starts now to blur in my mind, she lunged away from him into the closet, away from his grabbing hands, scrambling for something high on a shelf. When I saw the gun in her hand, I ran towards her, clumsy and falling, wanting to save her, to save us all. Time folded in on itself then. What is left lies in clear, yet disjointed pieces in my head. The gun, shining like a toy in her hand, how he snatched it away and waved it around. The gun on the floor, bending to pick it up. The noise that exploded around us. This is what I know about myself. She was all I wanted, and I took her away. T-Ray and I live just outside Sylvan, South Carolina, population 3,100. Peach stands and Baptist churches, that about sums it up. At the entrance to the farm, we had a big wooden sign with Owens Peach Enterprises painted across it in the worst orange colour you've ever seen. I hated that sign. But the sign was nothing compared with the giant peach perched atop a 60-foot pole beside the gate. Everyone at school referred to her as the Great Fanny, and I'm cleaning up the language. Its fleshy colour, not to mention the crease down the middle, gave it the unmistakable appearance of a rear end. Rosaline said it was T-Ray's way of mooning the entire world. That was T-Ray. He didn't believe in slumber parties or sock hops, which wasn't a big concern as I never got invited to them anyway. But he refused to drive me to town for football games, pet rallies, or beta club car washes, which were held on Sundays. He did not care that I wore clothes I made myself in home economics class, cotton print shirtwaists with crooked zippers and skirts hanging below my knees. Outfits only the Pentecostal girls wore. Pentecostal refers to the Protestant Catholic movement, so it refers to the fact that the clothes that Lily is wearing are rather traditional or chaste. I might as well have worn a sign on my back. I am not popular and never will be. I needed all the help that fashion could give me, since no one, not a single person, had ever said, "Lily, you are such a pretty child," except for Mrs. Jennings at church, and she was legally blind. I watched my reflection not only in the mirror, but in store windows and across the television when it wasn't on, trying to get a fix on my looks. My hair was black like my mother's, but basically a nest of cowlicks, and it worried me I didn't have much of a chin. I kept thinking I'd grow one the same time my breast came in, but it didn't work out that way. I had nice eyes though, what you would call Sophia Loren eyes, but still, even the boys who wore their hair in ducktails dripping with Vitalis and carried combs in their shirt pockets didn't seem attracted to me, and they were considered hard up. Matters below my neck had shaped up. Not that I could show off that part. It was fashionable to wear cashmere twin sets and plaid kilts mid-high, but T-Ray said hell would be like an ice rink before I went out like that. Did I want to end up pregnant like Bitsy Johnson, whose skirt barely covered her ass? How he knew about Bitsy is a mystery of life, but it was true about her skirts and it was true about the baby. An unfortunate coincidence is all it was. Rosaline knew less about fashion than T-Ray did, and when it was cold, God help me Jesus, she made me go to school wearing long breeches under my Pentecostal dresses. There was nothing I hated worse than the clumps of whispering girls who got quiet when I passed. I started picking scabs off my body and, when I didn't have any, gnawing the flesh around my fingernails till I was a bleeding wreck. I worried so much about how I looked and whether I was doing things right. I felt half the time I was impersonating a girl instead of really being one. Impersonating meaning pretending, stepping into the place of. I had thought my real chance would come from going to charm school at the women's club last spring. Friday afternoons for 6 weeks. But I got barred because I didn't have a mother, a grandmother, or even a measly aunt to present me with a white rose at the closing ceremony. Barred means to be prevented from attending. Rosaline doing it was against the rules. I cried till I threw up in the sink. "You're charming enough," Rosaline had said, washing the vomit out of the sink basin. "You don't need to go to some highfalutin school to get charm." "I do so," I said. "They teach everything. How to walk and pivot, what to do with your ankles when you sit in a chair, how to get in a car, pour tea, take off your gloves." Rosaline blew air from her lips. "Good Lord," she said. "Arrange flowers in a vase, talk to boys, tweeze your eyebrows, shave your legs, apply lipstick. What about vomit in a sink? They teach you a charming way to do that?" she asked. Sometimes I purely hated her. The morning after I woke T-Ray, Rosaline stood in the doorway of my room, watching me chase a bee with a mason jar. Her lip was rolled out so far I could see the little sunrise of pink inside her mouth. "What are you doing with that jar?" she said. "I'm catching bees to show T-Ray. He thinks I'm making them up." "Lord, give me strength." She'd been shelling butterbeans on the porch and sweat glistened on the pearls of her hair around her forehead. She pulled at the front of her dress, opening an airway along her bosom, big and soft as couch pillows. The bee landed on the state map I tacked on the wall. I watched it as it walked along the coast of South Carolina on scenic Highway 17. I clamped the mouth of the jar against the wall, trapping it between Charleston and Georgetown. When I slid on the lid, it went into a tailspin, throwing itself the glass over and over with pops and clicks, reminding me of the hail that sometimes landed on the windows. I'd made the jar as nice as I could with felty petals, fat with pollen, and more than enough nail holes in the lid to keep the bees from perishing, since all I knew, people might come back one day as the very thing they killed. To perish means to die, particularly in a way which is violent or sudden. I brought the jar level with my nose. "Come look at this thing fight," I said to Rosaline. When she stepped in the room, her scent floated out to me, dark and spicy like the snuff she packed inside her cheek. She held a small jug with its coin-sized mouth and a handle for her to loop her finger through. I watched her press it along her chin, her lips fluted like a flower, and then spit a curl of black juice inside it. She stared at the bee and shook her head. "If you get stung, don't come whining to me," she said, "'cause I ain't gonna care." That was a lie. I was the only one who knew that despite her sharp ways, her heart was more tender than a flower skin, and she loved me beyond reason. I hadn't known this until I was 8, and she bought me an Easter-dyed biddy from the mercantile. I found it trembling in a corner of its pen, the colour of purple grapes, with sad little eyes that cast around for its mother. An Easter-dyed biddy is a small chick that's been dyed a bright colour. Rosaline let me bring it home, right into the living room, where I strewed a box of Quaker oats on the floor for it to eat, and she didn't raise a word of protest. The chick left dollops of violet-streaked droppings all over the place, due, I suppose, to the dye soaking into its fragile system. We had just started to clean them up when T-Ray burst in, threatening to boil the chick for dinner, and fire Rosaline for being an imbecile. An imbecile is a stupid person. He started to swoop at the biddy with his tractor grease hands, but Rosaline planted himself in front of him. "There is worse things in this house than chicken shit," she said, and looked him up one side and up down the other. "You ain't touching that chick." His boots whispered uncle all the way down the hall. I thought, she loves me, and it was the first time such a far-fetched idea had occurred to me. Her age was a mystery, since she didn't possess a birth certificate. She would tell me she was born in 1909 or 1919, depending on how old she felt at that moment. She wasn't sure about the place, McLennanville, South Carolina, where her mama had woven sweetgrass baskets and sold them on the roadside. Like me selling peaches, I'd said to her. Not one thing like you selling peaches, she said back. You ain't got 7 children you got to feed from it. You've got 6 brothers and sisters? I thought of her as alone in the world except for me. I did have, but I don't know where one of them is. She'd thrown her husband out 3 years after they'd married for carousing. You put his brain in a bird and that bird would fly backward, she liked to say. I often wondered what that bird would do with Rosaline's brain. I decided half the time it would drop shit on your head, and the other half it would sit on abandoned nests with its wings spread wide. I used to have daydreams in which she was white and married T. Ray and became my real mother. Other times I was a Negro orphan she found in a cornfield and adopted. Once in a while I had us living in a foreign country like New York where she could adopt me and we could both stay on natural colour. My mother's name was Deborah. I thought that was the prettiest name I'd ever heard, even though T. Ray refused to speak it. If I said it, he acted like he might go straight to the kitchen and stab something. Once, when I asked him when her birthday was and what cake icing she preferred, he told me to shut up. And when I asked him a second time, he picked up a jar of blackberry jelly and threw it against the kitchen cabinet. We have blue stains to this day. I did manage to get a few scraps of information from him, though, such as my mother was buried in Virginia, where her people came from. I got worked up about that, thinking I'd found a grandmother. No, he tells me, my mother was an only child, whose mother died ages ago, naturally. Once when he'd stepped on a roach in the kitchen, he told me my mother had spent hours luring roaches out of the house with bits of marshmallow and trails of graham cracker crumbs, that she was a lunatic when it came to saving bugs. The oddest things caused me to miss her, like training bras. Who was I going to ask about that? And who but my mother could have understood the magnitude of driving me to junior cheerleader tryouts? I can tell you for certain T. Ray didn't grasp it. But you know when I missed her the most? The day I was 12, and I woke up with the rose petal stain on my panties. I was so proud of that flower, and I didn't have a soul to show it to, except Rosaline. Not long after that, I found a paper bag in the attic, stapled at the top. Inside it, I found the last traces of my mother. There was a photograph of a woman smirking in front of an old car, wearing a light-coloured dress with padded shoulders. Her expression said, "Don't you dare take this picture." But she wanted it taken. You could see that. You could not believe the stories I saw in that picture, how she was waiting at the car fender for love to come to her, and not patiently. I laid the photograph beside my eighth grade picture and examined every possible similarity. She was more or less missing a chin too, and even so, she was above average pretty, which offered me genuine hope for my future. The bag contained a pair of white cotton gloves stained the colour of age. When I pulled them out, I thought, her hands were inside here. I feel foolish about it now, but one time I stuffed the gloves with cotton balls and held them through the night. We're going to pause there now and going to continue on with the reading in tomorrow's session. There's a link on Show My Homework for a quiz that I'd like you to do now based on what we've read today. So if you go on to Show My Homework, click on the link and have a go at the questions. Have a great rest of your day, Year 9.